Hey, Margie here. Welcome to part 2 of the best of the 100 episodes of the Happy Bones, Happy Life podcast. The truth is there's so much information and I had so many fabulous guests. So what I picked were really nuggets that you can listen to today and implement into your life that could really make a big difference. So all sorts of great things. So I'm really excited to get started. So the first person and episode that I want to highlight is Dr. Terry Wahls. And Dr. Wahls is someone who's a clinical professor at the University of Iowa. She's done tremendous amount of clinical research. She teaches internal medicine residents. But the most interesting thing about Dr. Wahls is that she herself suffered from a chronic condition, multiple sclerosis. And her story is so inspiring and the lessons learned and what's come out of it that I really wanted to play this for you. But what's so fascinating is that she started out in a wheelchair, a reclined wheelchair for 4 years. And now she pedals to work on her bicycle. So it's really amazing what can happen with diet and lifestyle, but she's taken it to the next step and done research, and it's really amazing. But what I want to play for you is a clip that talks about why people with with multiple sclerosis and autoimmune conditions, why the medication puts them at high risk for osteoporosis and what she did to reverse that. So stay tuned.
In my own personal story, in many people with autoimmune issues, because of our health challenges, we've been given many rounds of steroids, high dose prednisone, salmeterol, and those high dose steroids lead to loss of calcium from our bones and lead to osteopenia, and may in fact lead to osteoporosis. So in fact, I've had many rounds of high dose salmeterol because of the trigeminal neuralgia, and then because of the MS. That took, and I'm a farm kid, so my bones were incredibly dense, like 3 standard deviations above women my age. But now, thanks to my many rounds of steroids, they're osteopenic. However, because of the interventions that I've created, in fact, my physicians are like, every year your bones are stronger. Every year you get more minerals in your bones. Like, what are you doing? And so here is the secret. The biggest driver for your bones is gravity, exercise. And so I do weight training. I do vibration plate training. Now, we do know that the biggest driver for absorbing calcium is your vitamin D level. So you want to have plenty of vitamin D, so lots of sunshine or a vitamin D supplement, and monitor your levels. However, what many colleagues do not understand, vitamin D can't work by itself. You have to have vitamin A. You need to have vitamin K2. You need to have plenty of magnesium. And then, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if there were more interactions that we've yet to discover. Nearly every study that has looked at supplementing people with a single supplement falls on its face, and it has been shown to be not very effective. Nearly every study that has looked at these radical things known as vegetables and eating patterns where you reduce sugar and processed foods and you ramp up vegetables, you have a much more favorable outcome. So our dietary plans ramps up the magnesium because of all the greens in the bone broth, ramps up the vitamin A because we talk about organ meat, and we also increase the greens, so that gives you more carotenoids. And so we have a much more nutrient-dense, mineral-dense plan, and we teach people the importance of gravity and weight-bearing exercise. And we teach them how to strategically, step by step, increase that dose. I mean, if you go out and you just suddenly slam your body with overtraining, you're going to lose ground. You have to do this in a very gradual, methodic strategy.
Wow, I'm always so inspired by Dr. Terry Wahls. Her book, The Wahls Protocol, has helped people all over the world with autoimmune conditions. And she's just such an incredible example of really when you're told, well, there's not so much we can do, to dig deeper. So one of the things that Dr. Wahls talked about that she uses was vibration. And so our next guest is Dr. Clint Rubin. And I'm so happy that I had the honor really of interviewing Dr. Rubin. Now, Dr. Rubin is a professor of biomedical engineering and director of the Center of Biotechnology at Stony Brook University in New York. And he was involved with the research with NASA for, on the astronauts, because they're in space, so they lose bone density. And so it's really quite incredible. I love the vibration platform. It's something I've been using for years now, every single day. But what I wanted you to hear is the research behind it, is how it works. There's something called the mesenchymal stem cells, and they can either become fat or they can become bone. And so I'm going to play the clip where Dr. Rubin discusses these mesenchymal stem cells and what's really happening to our bone marrow through the vibration. So listen in.
And in your bone marrow are two principal types of stem cells. There are hematopoietic stem cells that create essentially your immune system, your T and your B cells, and they create macrophages like osteoclasts, right? So your hematopoietic stem cells are the progenitor, or that's where osteoclasts come from. And also in your bone marrow is the mesenchymal stem cell, and MSCs, because mesenchymal is hard to say, for me anyway. These MSCs are pluripotent. They can become many different things when they grow up. So when they differentiate, when they're signaled to become something else, they can become bone cells, osteoblasts. Oh, well, they can become cartilage cells. They can become tendon cells. They can become muscle cells. Actually, satellite cells become muscle cells. But it turns out they can also become fat cells, something called an adipocyte. So an MSC can differentiate into a bone cell if signaled appropriately and grow your bone. But if it's not signaled to become a bone cell, chances are it's either going to hibernate in your marrow or it's going to be stimulated to become something else. And more often than not, particularly as we are adults, your MSCs differentiate into fat cells. And it's one of the reasons. So think of osteoporosis as a bone wasting disease. As we get older and older, after the age of 35, we have less and less bone. What is it that we have more of and that we're all aghast at? Is we have more and more fat. So not only is there less bone, but there's more fat, not only in your visceral cavity around your lungs and your heart and your spleen and your kidney and your liver, but under your skin, that horrible, sort of love handles or whatever you want. And also it turns out there's more fat in your marrow. So when you're young, a kid or a teenager, your marrow is really pretty red, as it turned out, because it's full of blood and it's very viable. It's sort of the old adage why a kid who breaks their arm basically heals by the time they get the emergency room, because it's very quick to recruit these bone cells from your bone marrow that are important to healing. As we age, and as your marrow cavity, this reservoir of stem cells, starts turning to fat rather than this viable pool of stem cells, it's harder to recruit them. It takes longer. There are fewer of them. So what we have found in our research, our cell work and our animal work, is that not only is it true that unstimulated, these MSCs have a bias towards turning to fat cells, these adipocytes. But if you mechanically challenge them, one of the reasons Venus Williams is so thin is that not only is she exercising and consuming calories, but she's not allowing those stem cells to become fat cells. She's driving them all to become muscle and bone. So we have found in our animal studies that standing on this device, even feeding these mice a very high fat diet. So you think of the mouse version of a McDonald's meal every day. So they would become obese. That in reality, if you feed them this high fat diet and you stand them on this device, you don't need to tell them stand on a device. It turns out that their little nest is on the device and we turn on the device underneath their nest so they don't even change their behavior. If you do this once per day, then not only do they build their bone and not only do they build their muscle, they actually don't grow fat. So they're driving their stem cells to become bone and muscle rather than fat.
The rest of my interview with Dr. Rubin, he goes into a lot more detail about the machine, how to use it. But as I said, I've had great results and so many of my patients and people I work with use it. And it's really been a wonderful adjunct to the comprehensive treatment. But I reached out to the company, and in honor of my 100th podcast episode, they're giving everyone, all the listeners, a $200 discount on a unit. So I'll have that information in the show notes, but the code that you need to use is MB200, Margie Bissinger 200. Okay, so the next episode that I want to highlight is episode 71 with Dr. Madiha Saeed. And this is on chronic inflammation, because this is one of the root causes of osteoporosis. And Dr. Saeed's a family practice physician, and she's an international speaker and the author of this amazing book, The Holistic RX, Your Guide to Healing Chronic Inflammation and Disease. And she's also, if you think I'm peppy, she takes this to another level. But the clip that I want to play is about when she talks about blood tests that you can just do through regular blood work that can give us so much information about if you have chronic inflammation, which is a root cause of osteoporosis. And we really do need to put that fire out. We can't just mask it. And that's the good thing, is there's so much that can be done. So the two tests, well, one of them deals with homocysteine. And the reason that's so important is because they found when that's elevated, it interferes with the normal cross-linking of collagen fibers, making them more fragile and susceptible to fracture. So very important for your bones. And I'm just going to play the clip because you'll hear from the expert about these two tests. For example, homocysteine, anything under 15 is going to say normal on your blood work.
Yeah, even that's ridiculous, right?
Right? So it's if you get the blood work, you see what's in red, and you're really the conventional medicine doctor, not to fault them or anything. This is just, they're going to, okay, not an issue. But for example, in your book, anything under 8 is considered, am I right? Or what would you,
Yeah,
I think you had 4 to 8.
closer to 6, right?
Yeah.
So like definitely under 8 for sure. Closer to 6 would be ideal. And so, because, the homocysteine, it's a simple blood test, and anybody can do it. It's really, it's an amino acid that's produced in the body that if it's way too much, like over 8, it can actually lead, they scientifically have proven that it can actually lead to mood disorders, poor mental performance, Alzheimer's disease, and also, osteoporosis.
Yeah, the other thing, it's true. One of the studies showed that just being over 8, there was a 2.5 increase in fracture risk. So this is something that everybody can, ask for in their blood work. It's not, and it's just a good marker of inflammation to see maybe this is one of your root causes. And if someone, there's many reasons, but there's things, what do you find usually might be some of the reasons that the homocysteine can be elevated?
Well, so just overall inflammatory, just by inflammation, but also B vitamin deficiencies, right? So B vitamin deficiency, just the B vitamins in and of themselves can really help to lower that overall inflammation, help your body detoxify. I also see this elevated in those people with MTHFR deficiencies, with either gene abnormalities. And I really don't really go into that unless somebody really wants it. check for gene, but if it's like super elevated, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you're gonna need extra help detoxifying to get rid of that inflammation. So that's where the B vitamins would really help. And then just adding, for me, what I do is I go to, like, add folate, methyl, or, depending on how high it is, or if they have history of MTHFR, then use the methylated versions. But, folate, B12, at least like 500 mcg per day, folate 50 mcg per day, and then B6 50 milligrams per day. And then recheck it again in 3 months and see what happens. And then, obviously, if it's still elevated after that, then it's best to see a functional medicine practitioner to see exactly what else could be going on. But remember that, there's so many things that we take on a regular basis, that it just even medications that can all weaken our B vitamins. And I noticed that the lower your B vitamins, the higher your inflammation. That's why adding these B vitamins in can actually lower that homocysteine and help your overall body and lower the inflammation.
Oh, that's such great information. And it's something I see on a regular basis. And it's not something, most people are told, all right, how's calcium, vitamin D? And that may be all they're told. But we know magnesium is important. But a lot of people don't even think of the B vitamins, but it's absolutely critical. So thank you so much for shedding light onto that, because this is something that we can control. And, it's a matter of sometimes just getting the folate and getting those B vitamins. So thank you for going into that. And let's just talk about the CRP as well, the C-reactive protein. Yeah.
Yes, because there's a direct correlation. There's so many studies, and I can link to them afterwards if you need me to.
Oh, no, it's okay.
There's an association between the circulating hsCRP, which is your high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and your bone mineral density that has been observed in like so many immune and inflammatory diseases, as well as in healthy individuals, suggesting that there's a link between the systemic inflammation and osteoporosis. So again, a very large marker of systemic inflammation that you can easily, that's great. And then what I do is that there's nothing specific that you do for that one besides for just the holistic lifestyle, right? The holistic lifestyle, once you lower the overall inflammation with the holistic lifestyle, and then I check again in 3 months, I'll recheck this after we made these dietary lifestyle changes and see where the homocysteine and the hsCRP is. But there has been studies with a direct correlation with that, with hsCRP and homocysteine in osteoporosis.
I love Dr. Saeed, and she's just done so much to highlight how important taking care of chronic inflammation is. We've done several programs together. Her book is amazing. And she also has a great course. So I'll put all that information in the show notes. So on the theme of inflammation, our next guest is someone who's really impacted my life tremendously, and that's Dr. Tom O'Brien. And Dr. O'Brien is really a recognized world expert when it comes to gluten and autoimmunity. And I think many of you know about my husband's story with autoimmunity, that truly I don't know that he would be alive today had we not figured out the gluten connection. And I see this with so many people I work with in osteoporosis. It's a huge root cause. So Dr. O'Brien, in this clip that I'm going to play, explains the problem with gluten. And he has a great way of putting things in very simple terms, making it easy. He puts analogies so that we understand it. So listen in.
So this thing about gluten, earlier I mentioned Professor Alessio Fasano at Harvard. And it was him and his team in 1997 that identified the protein that causes intestinal permeability, or the leaky gut. They identified it. And he's been studying this now for over 20 years. We think he'll get the Nobel Prize one day, because this affects millions and millions of people. And this paper that he just published in January, All Disease Begins in the Leaky Gut, he talks about there are two things that are known to trigger leaky gut every time. One is bacteria, too much bacteria in the small intestine called LPS. That stands for lipopolysaccharides. It's just gram-negative bacteria. That'll cause a leaky gut. And two, gluten. And now we know, I've got 5 studies in my all-day course on this. I have an online all-day course called certifiedglutenpractitioner.com. I have 5 studies in there that every human gets tears in the cheesecloth within 5 minutes of any wheat exposure coming out of the stomach into the small intestine. Every human, every time. And as we said in the beginning, most people don't feel it. It's an 8 to 1. You just don't feel when it's happening, but you tear the cheesecloth every single time, every human. Well, I feel fine when I eat my pizza. Well, yeah, but your brain's going, isn't it? Well, I didn't remember where my keys were for this morning. That may be the manifestation, right? Or it's your skin, or it's your hair, or it's your gallbladder, or it's your joints. So the really way to know about this is that there's a blood test now that's extremely accurate. You even can do the finger prick version of the blood test that's come out. Extremely accurate. It's called the wheat zoomer because you zoom in on the problem. And anybody can download the information on my website, thedr.com, thedoctor.com, just don't spell the word doctor out. Download the information for the wheat zoomer, take it to your doctor and say, please order this test for me. And if they won't, you can order it on my website and we'll send it to you, the finger prick. But I much prefer your doctor order it because it's going to drop their jaw when they see the results, when you work with them on that. But every human, every time, gets tears in the cheesecloth. Now, for full disclosure, Dr. Fasano has shown us that it's called transient intestinal permeability, meaning that you tear the cheesecloth, but it heals. Fastest growing cells in the body, the inside lining of the gut. You have a sandwich for lunch, you tear the cheesecloth, but it heals. You have pasta for dinner, you tear the cheesecloth and it heals. Croutons on your salad, tear the cheesecloth, but it heals. A cookie, tear the cheesecloth, but it heals. Day after week, after month, after year, until one day, you don't heal anymore. Now you've got the leaky gut. That's called loss of oral tolerance. That happens when you're 2 years old, 22 years old, 92 years old. Whenever it happens, now you've got the leaky gut. Now the macromolecules get into the bloodstream. Now the systemic inflammation starts, meaning inflammation throughout your entire body, pulling on the chain. And wherever your weak link is, the weak link's determined by all those molecules of the bacteria in your gut going through your system, turning the dimmers up or down. Wherever the weak link is, that's where you're going to develop the symptoms.
In the rest of episode 62, Dr. Tom goes in more detail about gluten, autoimmunity, and he does talk about 2 products that he created that have really helped my husband, colostrum, as well as an enzyme that blocks 98% of the gluten. So we use that all the time when we go out to dinner because you just never know. And so I'll have the information for both of those in the show notes. Well, we're going to continue with the gut because it's so important. And in the podcast, I've had many guests talk about the importance of our gut and GI system, because if we're not absorbing the nutrients or if there's problems, it's going to affect our bones. And it's really a huge risk factor that we totally need to deal with. Plus, as we know, the gut is where so many things begin. So when that improves, everything improves. But the next guest I want to talk about is Dr. Rachel Fresco. And Dr. Fresco is the founder and CEO of Biobotanical Research. And she's worked for over 30 years, really finding these great botanical formulas that to help with all sorts of things, but mainly focusing on the gut. And the clip I'm going to play talks about the mouth, because oftentimes we don't even realize that the bacteria in our mouth can affect what's going on in our gut and the rest of our system. So I'm going to play this and listen in.
He's super excited about it. And the oral cavity is part of our digestive tract. It's not separate. And it's sad that in medicine that things got so divided, because did you know that when you swallow, you have like trillions of bacteria going to your gut, right? So if your mouth is full of bad bacteria and yeast, just that can cause you to have intestinal issues, which affect your bone health, due to malabsorption. So I saw one study that just brushing your teeth after meals cut down on the candida in your gut by 50%.
Wow, that's
just regular brushing. So you can imagine if you're using something with biocidin in it that's really going after those bugs, and using it a few times a day and using your rinse. So, and the other thing that's really useful is the biocidin spray.
One of the best things about what Dr. Fresco talked about is that it's an easy tweak. All you need to do is change your toothpaste. Since this was broadcast, so many people contacted me that using the toothpaste has made a big difference in the amount of plaque, and their dentists have commented. Personally, I used to go every 3 months to the periodontist for cleaning, and now they told me that my mouth looks so good, I just have to go every 6 months. So it's a real win-win situation. I love their products, and I have all the information in the show notes. Next up is a close friend and colleague, Mindy Gorman-Plutzer. And Mindy is a functional nutritionist and eating psychology coach, and her expertise is disordered eating. And this is a root cause of osteoporosis. So in this clip, she talks about that. And she beautifully states how it's so important that we connect to our bodies, which we often don't. So here it goes.
So the people I see have been diagnosed with and treated for anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating disorder. Others are simply misinformed and reacting to societal and cultural messages to eat this, not that. But most are challenged with physical symptoms resulting from many years of engagement in disordered behaviors. And osteoporosis is a serious consequence of such challenges. And yes, men are vulnerable to osteoporosis. It shows up in the athlete that's challenged with stress fractures, the chronic dieter who's been restricting calories and nutrients for years, as well as the midlife woman who's taken on the role of caregiver and puts her need for exercise and nutrient-dense food on the back burner. And I'm sure any of these scenarios resonate with those of us who are listening today.
Unfortunately, I'm sure they do. This is a story that we all hear all the time, and
yes,
people don't realize, as you're saying, the consequences. So thank you.
Exactly. So what are the contributing factors to osteoporosis? As you mentioned earlier, malnutrition, malabsorption. But then there's the stress piece that comes from the chronic state of fight or flight due to both the physiology and the psychology of the eating disorders, right? Denying our hunger, eating when we aren't hungry in an effort to self-soothe, behaviors that are designed to purge, punishing exercise, laxative abuse, and vomiting. They're all methods employed to disconnect from what we deem intolerable. So it's important to remember as we go forward, and this really can apply to many of us, disordered or not, our relationship with food is a mirror for our relationship to life, how we treat ourselves, and basically what we believe we're worthy of. My message today is that we can learn to honor our bodies and connect to the exquisite wisdom that wants us to be whole. And while what we eat is vitally important to our health, our mood, and yes, our bones, we need to look at our behavior, the experience that we bring with us to the table that where our meals are served, and the table of life. We've got to develop an awareness that allows us to facilitate the changes that basically empower us to make the choices regarding what we're eating.
Mindy really has amazing information, and this is something that we need to deal with. If you or someone you love has an eating disorder, have them get treatment, because if they're a young person, it's just going to lead to bone loss in the future. And if it's you, the good news is there's a lot that can be done. And Mindy has 2 free resources that she's sharing with us that were not in the original podcast, but I'm going to have them in the show notes. One is a free mini course and one's a free guide. So just it's very important to deal with this issue if it's something that affects you or, again, someone that you love. Okay, so moving forward, we're going to change our topic a little bit, and we're talking about heavy metals, because this is an area that's just not talked about. When people see their doctor, and get evaluated for osteoporosis, they don't say, oh, is it possible you have, heavy metals in your system? So the first, we're going to do there's 2 different clips I'm going to do, but first we're going to highlight Wendy Myers. And Wendy is a detox expert as well as a functional diagnostic nutritionist who's done so much work with detox. And she talks about heavy metals that affect our bones. I'm going to play 2 clips. One clip, she talks about heavy metals and really how it interferes with estrogen, which can interfere with our bones, as well as lead. And then the second clip, she talks about what happens when lead is in our bones and the DEXA test. So listen in.
Yeah, so I'll go over all the different things that can affect bone health. So number 1, you need healthy levels of estrogen, because estrogen will prevent bone loss. So there's heavy metals and toxins that interfere in your estrogen production. And so there's lots of like xenoestrogens on the market. There's pesticides, there's plastics, there's BPA, there's lots of different, hormone mimicking like estrogen mimicking toxins. But there's also metalloestrogens, there's mercury and nickel, and there's other metals that will kind of block your estrogen receptors and interfere in estrogen working properly in your body, or reduce estrogen production as well. And so indirectly, by affecting estrogen, it can negatively impact your bone health and bone density. And then your bones are kind of used like garbage cans in your body. Your body can tuck heavy metals away in your bones. So the body namely puts lead and aluminum in your bones. Other metals can go in there as well, but I find lead is probably one of the number 1 things that get into our bones. And everyone has lead. There is no exception to that rule, because lead has been used, number 1, passed down from mother to child. So it gets passed, our bones are formed from our mother's body, which will have lead, and that gets into us in that way. And then we accumulate it through, there's over 50% of homes still have leaded paint on the walls or underneath it, or layers and layers and layers. So anytime there's, repainting done or restoration or knocking down a wall, all that lead dust gets into the environment, and it's devastating for children living in those environments. Or even if a neighbor restores their home and is like standing and scraping this old lead paint off the house, that will get into your yard and where your children are playing, and people don't think about this stuff. And then there's the leaded gasoline. It was up until, the late 70s that leaded gasoline was allowed in the United States, and that all got into the air and then deposited into our soils, where it still persists and gets into our food and food-based supplements. And so it doesn't matter if you're a vegan, vegetarian, you eat animal proteins, lead is in a lot of our food today, and in the water supply. If you have a home with old galvanized pipes, the main pipe leading into your home, or you have old galvanized piping, that's going to leach lead into your water supply. Yeah, and it's really interesting too that lead, it's very, very dense. So it can make your bones look much more dense than they really are on a DEXA scan or a bone density scan. And I think doctors are just not aware of this. I think a lot of them just don't factor this in when they're doing bone density tests. So, it takes a really long time to get rid of lead in the bones. I mean, it can take 10 years.
I think the information Wendy highlights is just critical, because it's oftentimes not even part of the equation, but yet it can have a profound effect on our bones and overall health. In the rest of the interview, Wendy continues about really how to detox, and she's created some amazing products that make it easy. They're just, one is a daily detox drink that I personally do every day, but just some easy ways to detox. Well, we're going to continue this discussion with Dr. Christine Schaffner. And Dr. Schaffner is a naturopathic physician, and her episode is all on heavy metals and our bones. But what I'm going to play now is about cadmium and how that can really affect our bone health. So here we go.
And then the other, one that comes up in the research is cadmium. And there was a study that actually looked at blood levels of lead and cadmium and related it to low bone density. And so they saw when people had a higher blood level of these metals, which is a whole nother story. We can talk about testing. And if you actually have, lead in your blood or cadmium in your blood that's measurable, you're quite toxic with these things. But basically, they showed in this one study I was reviewing with people with higher blood heavy metals, they did show a correlation with lower bone density. So looking at that, we just talked about the impact of why that might be for lead. But cadmium also has an impact on bone remodeling and osteoblast activity. So our osteoblasts help us to build bone. So cadmium can impair that. And then cadmium also has an effect on our ability for our kidneys to absorb calcium and phosphorus and also activate vitamin D. So if all of that is not working in proper order, then we don't absorb calcium in our gut. So they have similar mechanisms as well, cadmium and lead. But cadmium, when we think about cadmium, cigarette smoking can be a source of cadmium. More industrial exposures can be related to cadmium. There are nickel and cadmium batteries, in our obviously in our life that we can get exposed to over time. But cadmium is something that I probably underestimate. When we look at strategies to detoxify heavy metals, we use a couple different strategies I can talk about in a moment, but when I'm thinking about mercury and lead, those same agents also take care of cadmium. So I think sometimes I underestimate really the impact that cadmium has on our overall health and our bone health in particular. And I'm always, surprised when I see a high cadmium level, because I don't think cadmium maybe it is talked about as much.
Dr. Schaffner continues her interview with a lot of information about heavy metals and how to also detox them. So again, something to consider when we're looking at all the root causes of osteoporosis. Dr. Schaffner was also on the podcast one more time, highlighting her non-toxic skincare and why she created it. So I'll put the link for that as well in the show notes. So since we're on toxins, I wanted to highlight Lara Adler. And Lara is a person who's really a toxins expert. She's sort of like a geek with toxins, but she's the one that teaches all the professionals about toxins. And I've taken numerous courses and studied with Lara, and I've learned so much. But the clip that I want to highlight, because there's a lot of information, but again, what can we do? I want you to be able to listen and take something away that you can put into your life right away. So Lara talks about plastics. Now, plastics, I think a lot of us know that plastics can have significant negative effects on our hormones, and they're called endocrine disruptors, and they really can disrupt the endocrine system, which can have significant effects on our bones. So in terms of plastics, they're here. We're not going to be able to just get rid of plastics, but she gives us a few easy things that we can do to reduce our exposure. So I'm going to play that clip now.
Yeah, there's 5 things that can amp up or increase the rate at which these plastic molecules migrate out of the plastic and into your food or water or environment. And those are heat, oil, acidity, abrasion, and time. So heat is when you put you put your plastic in the microwave and you heat it up and there's food in it. Heat also comes into play when you take your leftover pasta sauce or soup or whatever it is that you've cooked, and you're gonna go, oh, I'm gonna put it in the Tupperware container and then stick it in the fridge. So you're now putting a hot substance in contact with your plastic. Oil, when we put oily foods in contact with plastic, it starts to slowly break down the plastic itself. So that's going to increase leaching. when we have acidic foods in contact. So, not just things like lemon, but tomatoes. Tomatoes are quite acidic. So if we look at, and everybody has had this at one point, I share about this in my class, Margie, is the orange stained Tupperware container that like literally everybody has had at one point. And people put it in the dishwasher and they scrub it, and it's like never actually ever clean. It always looks orange, and people are like, I don't know what's wrong with this. Well, it's a really good illustrative example of what happens when you have hot, oily, and acidic. So it's usually always tomato soup, or sauce, or something like that, some tomato-based product that has oil in it, that is acidic because it's tomato-based, and it's usually hot when it goes into the container. And what happens is you've got this 1, 2, 3 punch, and you have where the plastic stops and the sauce starts, and this barrier gets blurred. And so what you're actually seeing, the reason why you can't wash the orange off is because it's not on the plastic, it's physically embedded into the structure of the plastic. And so what that also means is that there's been a transfer, right? You have molecules in of oil that are saturated with these lycopene compounds from the tomatoes that are now stuck inside the matrix of the plastic. And that also means that there's plastic molecules that are now in your sauce. So wow. A really good visual. People are like, oh God, I'm throwing out all my plastic containers. Great. Or just reuse them in a non-food area. So like bring them to the garage and put your nuts and bolts in them, or use them as an organizational, something, put crayons in them, whatever. It's an example of, we don't want to be a plastic phobic. We don't want to be afraid of plastic because plastic will never go away. But we want to be very conscious of our use as it pertains to food primarily.
That was just so helpful. So a lot of times they sell it with the plastic tops, but I guess as long as that doesn't touch the food.
Yeah, yes.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of glass containers, most glass containers actually have plastic lids. I know Pyrex a couple of years ago launched a line that has glass and silicone lids, which are great. So those are my favorite.
Lara is just a wealth of information. And as I said, I've learned so much from her. And so if you are a professional and want to delve deeper into this, I'd say Lara is your person, and I'll give her contact information. But she also has an Instagram account that's open to everybody, where she really puts out great information that we could all use to reduce the toxins in our life. So we're going to change now topics a little bit. And the next person that I want to highlight is Dr. Alan Christianson. And Dr. Alan Christianson is a naturopathic physician who specializes in the thyroid. And there's a huge relationship between the thyroid and osteoporosis. And so many of the listeners I know have Hashimoto's, as do I. And it's very fascinating because Dr. Christianson has found that too much iodine can be a huge issue. So listen to what he has to say about that.
However, the rate of autoimmune thyroid disease, before we got on, we were talking about Hashimoto's, and that's the most common kind of thyroid disease in the modern world. The rates of it in the years after iodine fortification in the United States went up 26-fold, 26 times.
Oh my.
And that's the theme, is iodine is this crazy thing to where it's got such a narrow range. There's not a big difference between one person to the next in terms of how much they require, but there's a big difference in terms of how much we can tolerate. And many people can tolerate extra and do fine with it. They're not the ones who are going to get thyroid disease, but those susceptible to thyroid disease are the ones that cannot tolerate the excesses.
Too much iodine is not something that's generally recognized as an issue. And I know I was unaware of it until after reading Dr. Christianson's book, when I realized that I was really eating a lot of iodine. And so I took his suggestions, reduced my iodine content, and around 2 months later had my blood work done, and my thyroid antibodies, the level was lower than it's ever been. And also the level of thyroid hormones was better than it's ever been. So all sorts of great stuff. Next up, we're going to talk about ingredients that can be harmful to your bones. And this is episode 61 with Mira Dessy. And Mira is a nutritionist, and she's also known as the ingredient guru because she really has evaluated ingredients and really was able in the interview to talk about what can be harming our bone. A lot of times these ingredients are hidden. We have no idea. And the clip I'm going to play is about EDTA, and she'll go into that, why that's an issue and something that should be avoided. So here we go.
And there's one preservative in particular that is really bad for bone health. It's usually listed either as EDTA, and by the way, anytime you see all capital letters on the food label, it's short for this like really long chemical name, so don't eat it.
Okay, the Mira rule. So if you see short letter abbreviation, done, pass it, right?
That's right, don't eat it. If it's all capital letters, skip it. But it's also sometimes listed as calcium disodium EDTA. And so the calcium part might make people think that there's calcium in there.
Yes, absolutely.
And the truth is it's not. It's an additive, it's a preservative. It's made using formaldehyde. It's made using sodium cyanide. Like, it's really not bad for you. It's also a heavy metal detox thing. It's used to pull out of the body. And as a result, when we consume this, it can strip things like calcium, iron, zinc, copper, molybdenum, like all of these things that are so important for healthy bones.
So where would we see this typically?
So it tends to be found in things like pickles, canned foods, canned beans, for example, that kind of thing. It can sometimes appear in, when you have canned seafood, that sort of thing.
And how common is it?
It's very common. EDTA is really big in the food thing. And here's a really, really important point. It's technically generally recognized as safe, which is also referred to as GRAS. And that GRAS listing means the government has decided that it's okay to eat a little bit. Like it's not, as long as you don't have too much, it's not bad for you. There's a couple of challenges with that though. One is, who figures out how much is okay? And I'm here to tell you, it's not the government, it's the food producer who wants to put it in their product, who says, we've consulted the experts and they said it was okay. And the other challenge is, and this one's really serious, you're not supposed to have more than a certain amount, but who's keeping track of how much you're eating? Because you're not sitting there and going, well, how many parts per million of EDTA did I eat today? We don't really pay attention to that, And so you could potentially be eating a number of foods that have it and not be aware of what your accumulated impact is. And then you get to a point where maybe you've exceeded the recognized as safe levels.
Well, that's crazy because you could be eating green beans. If I'm hearing you correctly, I could be eating green beans and be eating too many green beans. And it could be, that's where this would be.
You could have like a salad niçoise, and you could use canned green beans, and you could use canned shrimp, and you could use, canned potatoes. Not that I would recommend that. That sounds pretty gross, actually. But I mean, you could be eating all these things, and that's just one meal, and who knows where else it is in your diet. So a part of the challenge is, our food supply, they tend to do something that I call funny math, where they say so much is okay, but there's really no oversight in terms of how much you're getting in a day, because nobody knows. Like, you eat differently than I mean, we both eat fairly similarly. We both aim to eat clean, but there's no hard and fast rule about what we're eating every day. And so they just say, this is the level, and then nobody monitors it.
In the rest of Mira's interview, she talks about some other ingredients that are truly detrimental to our bones and overall health. But I will put Mira's contact information in the show notes because she's a wealth of information, and we certainly don't want to be eating anything that could be harming us that we just don't know about. Next up is Dr. Sally LaMont. And Dr. Sally's a naturopathic physician who truly uses food as medicine. And in her episode, that's what she talked about, how we can use food as medicine to improve our bone health. But in this clip, she talks about something in the cruciferous vegetables that can help our bones. So stay tuned.
It is a very tripped out vegetable. And because it's a part of the cruciferous vegetable family, that whole family, broccoli kind of as the main star, and broccoli seeds. We don't want to forget about broccoli seeds, sprouted broccoli seeds. They all contain a group of sulfur-containing compounds, the most important of which is called sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is actually formed when we chew these vegetables up. And sulforaphane is pretty amazing stuff. It has been shown in cell culture and mice studies to stimulate osteoblasts to lay down new bone. And I think your viewers probably all know that osteoblasts lay down bone, and then osteoclasts kind of come up. I think of clast as like a claw. It claws away bone and remodels bone. So osteoporosis happens when there's an imbalance between bone laydown and bone erosion. And the sulforaphane in the whole cruciferous vegetable family helps improve osteoblast function and keeps the osteoclasts from removing too much bone. But these sulforaphane compounds don't stop there. They're really helpful for detoxification and especially helping to detoxify estrogen through what's called phase 2 liver metabolism. So we use sulforaphane, or there's a variety of different things on the market, I3C or DIM. These are extracts of broccoli seed that improve estrogen metabolism and balance out what's called estrogen dominance. But, you know, this whole family of vegetables is really high in fiber and feeds the gut microbiome, helps to reduce the drive towards obesity. So, and just another quick thing I've learned over the last month is sulforaphane activates this thing called NRF2, which is a whole set of genes that not only reduce inflammation, but inhibit viral replication. So that's some really good reasons. And of course, to get these veggies in, but they're really rich in calcium and magnesium and folic acid.
In the rest of Dr. Sally's interview, she talks about other things, you know, other ways we can use food as medicine and help our bones. But I'll put in the show notes her website. It's drsallykitchen.com. But she has some really, really great recipes on that and information on other ways that you can use food as medicine. So next up, we're completely changing things a little bit. And I think for everybody who's been listening to the podcast and knows me, that I believe it's really the combination of mind, body, spirit, how I've been working with my patients for so many years, but also for everything. I think when we combine all of these things is when we get the absolute maximum benefit and we heal, we can heal. And so the next guest is someone who I adore, and I just think she's really a person who has major abilities, and that's Kourtney Levens. And Kourtney is a person who is able to speak to the angels. And I've had some personal experiences with Kourtney that are incredible. And I interviewed Kourtney, and I just want to play a clip because so many times people are afraid. They're afraid to ask for help. But once you do, once you open up to that universal guidance that's available to everyone, miracles can truly happen. And I see this every single day of my life. And I used to not tell people about this part of me, that I was spiritual and that I did ask for guidance. But once I did, started teaching people what I do, I really couldn't get over it. people started healing from chronic pain, and just people were able to add another dimension to their life. So I'm just going to play a little clip from Kourtney where she tells you how, just briefly, how to get in touch with the angels and how they really can help us in our life. So listen in.
Sure. So yes, from what they've shown me, everybody has angels. But here's kind of the catch of it. Your angels can only intervene in your life under two circumstances. One, it's a near-death experience and it's not your time to go. We've all heard stories of people who have maybe even died on the operating table and have seen the light and they were told, no, it's not your time and you have to go back, okay? Or maybe they were driving in their car and the car went to swerve off the road and some unseen force put it back in their lane, right? Okay, so those are your angels. They're intervening. It's not your time to go. You still have to stay here. The other time your angels can intervene is when you ask. And so it's very, very important that we learn to talk to our angels and communicate and ask. And it can be out loud. It can be inside your head. You can write something down. You know, I had a client who said, do I have to go to church? Do I have to be a person of faith? No, you don't. You can think to yourself, angels, and they're there.
So I highly suggest trying this, listening for guidance, asking for guidance, whether it be journaling, whether it be through speaking, or even just thinking, and see what happens. Now, for the last guest I'm going to highlight, it's someone who I really, really adore, and that's Debora Wayne. And Debora Wayne is also another gifted human being who has this ability. She has this amazing energy, and she calls it high-speed healing. And I've had her so many times to my programs, and I've received so much benefit from her. And I think it's important to realize there are other ways to heal ourselves and things that may not be in our repertoire or even things we've considered. So I'm going to play this clip where Debora really talks about how this can help our bones and all the facets that affect our bones. So here we go.
Well, I have not studied this in the research lab yet, but what I have seen, first of all, is I've seen the spine literally change. I've seen people, as I mentioned earlier, with discs that were blown and bulging and they were supposed to have surgery, be able to completely avoid it because the bone structure changed. And one of the things I'm sure you know and teach is that the bones are affected by stress, and the emotions that we deny, suppress, repress, ignore, those emotions are creating more stress, way more stress than people realize. And even more importantly, those emotions, they disrupt the hormones. They're creating stress hormones, and we know that this all affects bones. And so what I find is we live in a world that is all about thinking and figuring things out and research and analyzing, but don't bring those feelings here. So the feelings like overwhelm and fear and anxiety and depression and anger and guilt and shame, they go underground. But if they're not resolved, it's like having a ringing, twisting, emotional pain that is affecting your gut, your digestion, your sleep, your stress hormones, your immune system, your nervous system. And I can pretty much guarantee this is going to show up as bone effects as well as many, many other symptoms.
Debora is truly amazing. I adore her. And she's come to numerous of my classes and programs, and we've done a lot of work together. And I've gone twice actually to her day of healing. And several people in my classes have also gone. And I just can't even get over it. People have reported shoulder pains reduced, back pain, chronic pain, as well as reduced anxiety and so much more. And I have to admit, I truly do not understand how this works. but it does. So again, that's what I like to expose people to, all sorts of ways of healing, because so much is even beyond what we can comprehend, but it's available. And that's been my goal on the podcast, to bring in experts and ideas and sort of a smorgasbord. You can choose what resonates with you. And I will have links to Debora and her programs and her Day of Healing, because it is pretty miraculous. And as I said, I don't know how it works, but it's great. So anyway, and I just can't thank everybody enough for being with me on this journey. And if moving forward, I want to continue the journey. So if you have areas that you'd like me to get experts on, please send me an email at margiebissinger.com, or you can respond any of the ways you listen to the podcast. There are places that you can respond, and I will get the message. And also, if you yourself had an interesting journey with lessons learned, please, I'd love to feature you as well. So thank you so much for being with you. And together, we're all going to grow and continue this journey, and just continue that we can live our best, healthiest life ever. So as I always say, bye for now, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.